Hello, my name's Dr. Cameron Jones, and today we are talking about asthma. Now, anyone who has had asthma or has had any difficulty breathing knows that this is a very serious topic. And I think that this is a really important episode that I wanted to talk to you about because asthma is a lot more endemic and affects so many people worldwide. Then also, when people call me and tell me about mold in their properties, often they're concerned about the impact that it has on their families. And so, in today's live stream, I'm going to be reviewing a really important paper that came out in the last week, but I'm also going to be doing a few other things as well. I'm going to be really discussing this whole issue of climate change and environmental allergens, those that are connected with asthma. We're going to be going through some of the microbiology which affects and means that people have to go and see their healthcare provider to get things like corticosteroids like this to control their asthma. I'm not going to be focusing on the management plans for maintaining asthma. I'm not going to be really talking about all of those medically important components of asthma management, but I am going to be talking about indoor air quality, environmental pollution, and I'm going to be highlighting some really important research. Stick around to the end of this live stream and I'm going to review some things that you can do to minimize your asthmatic response. And this has been shown in the research academic literature to be very effective in the control of asthma and importantly in the antifungal ability of some of these things that I'm going to be talking about towards the end of the live stream. But I want to get moved straight into it now. And I want to just talk about something that's happened just in the last week. In fact, the day before yesterday, the World Health Organization and the World Meteorological Association or organization, the WMO, met in Madrid. And basically, they had a conference on the UN Climate Change Conference. And they were reviewing a lot of the environmental triggers which are being increasingly linked to adverse health in people. And again, I said we're going to be focusing on asthma today. And climate change, not only the production of greenhouse gases, but the ocean is heating up. Greenhouse gases are at an all-time high. We have more acidic seas. We have erratic rainfall. We have extremes of temperature, extremes of rainfall, and this is leading to impacts on food security. And all of this is connected, all of these large-scale biological systems, and then they create conditions which create a lot of aeroallergens being produced and becoming airborne. And really, this is the trigger for asthma. And so this particular this is really the foundation for today's live stream, that really these problems in the environment and climate change are leading to a whole range of problems throughout the world. Now, I'm here in Melbourne where we're doing these live streams, and we're at the 3rd anniversary of thunderstorm asthma a couple of years ago, and a number of people lost their lives due to the extreme weather that was experienced and the amount of particulate matter that was stirred up, and essentially people weren't able to escape in our urban environment, and they breathed this in, and this brought about really serious cascade type effects which led to uncontrolled asthma and unfortunately loss of life for some people. And essentially that's just here in Melbourne. But what about the bushfires which are occurring right now up in Sydney and have shrouded that city in really massive levels of smoke. And as we were talking last week at the end of last week's live stream about the submicron fungal fragments which get stirred up and become airborne, all of this creates these biocolloids, and smoke is a perfect example of a colloidal system, meaning that these smoke particles, diesel exhausts, and the breakdown of combustion for trucks and all. When we have a fire, we've got all of this charcoal debris that becomes airborne, and all of those fine particles can now be breathed in, and you can't really escape it. And this is a function of micron and submicron particulate matter forming these large-scale colloidal systems, and the research literature is dense with regard to the impact on your health, your cardiovascular health, your ability to breathe, and irritation. And certainly this creates ideal situations to put a lot of stress on your body, increase your immune system. So today I'm focusing on an excellent publication which came out on the 28th of November. And the title of this publication, again, it's up on the screen, it's in the show notes. It is The Impact of Ambient Environmental Exposures to Microbial Products on Asthma Outcomes from Birth to Childhood. And I wanted to focus on children because this is obviously a very large part of the population, but whenever people call us about their concerns about their indoor environment, usually people have concerns for not only themselves, but the welfare of their family. And children are particularly responded, they respond really like a canary to environmental toxicants. And so this particular publication is really important. We're going to be spending a little bit of time going through what the publication said and how this affects how we deal with this complex world that we're living in, often with these unexpected events like the fire and all the particulate matter in Sydney, or these unexplained and unexpected weather events, which in a sense can be explained by climate change, but when they happen, they're very severe. Now, why is this important? Well, in 2017, there were 4.7 million children aged between 0 and 14 in Australia. And the next cohort, there are 3.2 million young people aged from 15 to 24. So essentially, this is the percentage of population that this live stream is focusing on. And in between 2017 and 18, there were 2.7 million Australians with asthma. That is 1 in 9, or 11.2% of the population. And there are gender differences between asthmatics, and overall females have a higher rate of asthma compared to men at 12.3% versus 10.2%. And in young people, asthma is more common in boys aged between 0 and 14 than in girls at 12.1% versus 7.9% respectively. Now, climate change. It has been talked about and it's been in the research literature for years. And I pulled up a publication from The Lancet from 15 years ago, back in 2004. And I've put this up on the screen because I wanted to highlight a couple of passages from this and read from it. Back in 2004, they were saying that there has been a 160% increase in asthma development in preschool children between 1980 and 1994. So this is a long time ago. These impacts on public health have been known about for a long time, and there's a groundswell of interest now in climate and the environment and how it affects our health. And The Lancet was then saying that climate change and the production of greenhouse gases and the warming of the planet increases the growth rate of plants which produce pollens. These pollens then become airborne. They then complex. Even then, they're stating that diesel particles are particularly effective at delivering pollen particles to immune cells in the lungs, which means that inner city children face dual threats from urbanization and pollution from vehicles, as well as the emissions caused by greenhouse gases. And they're also saying, again 15 years ago, increasing temperatures encourage growth of mold and fungi and stimulate photochemical smog. So this is the context that we're living in. But what about when we don't have extreme weather events? What else contributes to asthma apart from the weather? Well, I want to go through some statistics before we move into that. The World Health Organization states that 235 million people suffer from asthma worldwide. What's the impact on health? Well, in Australia, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare has published statistics for 2017, and 441 people died due to asthma. What about in the United States? Well, they have a much larger population, but 10 people die per day due to asthma, and it has an economic cost of approximately $82 billion US. But what about other parts of the world? India, for example, already has 18% of the world's population, and 1/10 of the total number of worldwide asthma sufferers live in India. Well, what does the research say about this wonderful paper that came out earlier in the week? Well, essentially, ambient microbes like bacteria, viruses, and fungi are well known and acknowledged in the research literature to trigger asthma. Now, there is some controversy as to whether they promote asthma in early life, or if exposure to these microbes in early life has a preventative effect. And this publication has reviewed all of the research literature and has got an excellent bibliography in it, which isolates and identifies which literatures said what and what their relationship is. And I'm going to just focus on some of the take-home points in this publication. So what the scientists did is that they reviewed or harvested over 3,000 research articles focusing on asthma. They pared this down to 65 studies which were research only, that is, not reviews, not animal studies, not mice studies, not specific microbiological or biochemical data, but focused on this population research on what is the cause and effect between certain environmental conditions and asthma. And they found that out of those, there were 65 that focused on people, and out of that, 11 of them focused on children. And we need to move on to something called biomarkers now, because obviously we need to move away from the fact that, yes, we understand and accept that things in the air can challenge our airway and our respiration and our response to that. The scientists are looking at particular features in the microbes. So for bacteria, for example, you will often see in the research literature endotoxin. Now, what are endotoxins? Well, again, when a cell dies or breaks down, its cell wall lyses open or it opens up, and you can measure the concentration of endotoxin present in any particular environment, and that will give you a numerical concentration of the amount of bacteria that are present. And so these are termed biomarkers, and biomarkers are really, really important when you're reviewing any of the scientific literature, because they're probably going to be talking about the biomarkers, and that is really a surrogate index for the impact that these have on the cause and effect relationship that is being investigated regarding asthma. So for fungi, you look often at ergosterol or this beta-D-glucan. All of these essentially are cell wall components, and you can consider these as similar to cholesterol because they carry out the same function in fungi as cholesterol does in animal cells. And they're very important for the production of new cells. And so by measuring these biomarkers like ergosterol or your beta-D-glucans, you can then measure the concentration of fungi that are present. And again, this is not looking at whole cultures on Petri plates. This is looking at the way it stimulates the body or the immune system, because usually this is a cytokine immune stimulating effect which is occurring in the body. I'm not going to talk too much or at all about viruses, but there is a rich literature about the connection between the common cold and other types of virus-mediated pathologies and how these interfere and stimulate the immune system to create an asthma effect, which is better or worse depending on the causative agent, whether it's a virus or not. And it's quite a complex area. It's an area of microbiology that I'm not that familiar with, and I'm going to leave it alone and stick with the fungi and bacteria. So, talking about bacteria and endotoxins, well, as I've already mentioned, when these cells break down, they cause inflammation, and it is this inflammation which leads to such serious health problems for people with asthma, because if you already have an impaired airway and it's difficult to breathe, you can have all sorts of other problems occurring, and other infections can quickly spread and start. Hence the invasive aspergillosis, which occurs in severely immunocompromised people and is an active form of infection. Now, the main way these bacterial endotoxins affect people is via inhalation. And again, as I said last week, the micron and submicron cell wall fragments that you find in water-damaged building environments are really the problem for people is the stimulation of the immune system with these endotoxins. And there has been a lot of really great research looking at the correlation between the amount of dust present in homes and the amount of endotoxins. And it's really a bit of a no-brainer. Those homes that have a lot more dust tend to have a positive connection or correlation with the number of asthmatic kids and the episodes in their presentation to hospitals. So this is why in many cases dust is used as another type of biomarker for measuring not only home cleanliness but the predisposition for conditions that will lead on to asthma. Now, many people have probably heard about the positive and negative connections with having a cat or a dog present in the home. Well, certainly for young people, there are quite a few studies showing that it is in fact beneficial for young children to be primed, in a sense, with the cat fur or dog fur. Now, this is somewhat counterintuitive because a lot of these conditions, these animals, are well known to create conditions that stimulate asthma, and yet there is a whole lot of other research which shows in fact the opposite effect. And this has led to some fantastic epidemiological microbiology literature out there which is looking at the role that animals have to play in reducing or increasing asthma. And really this is a very dense topic, and I urge you to look at the literature regarding that. But the take-home message is that if you've got a lot of dust in your house, a lot of cat and dog fur, that's probably not good for your kids. But if you've got a very clean home with minimal dust, then maybe the presence of the cat and dog changes the microbiome in the home environment to such a condition that it in fact offers or confers some sort of protective immunity to children who are predisposed to asthma. Now, aspergillus fumigatus, I've sort of jumped ahead to something I want you to remember, and if you remember nothing else about this live stream, all of the literature regarding asthma and which fungi are universally connected with adverse respiratory health, aspergillus fumigatus that I've got up on screen is the #1 fungus, which is always connected to these adverse health experiences. And it produces profuse spores. And you can see that I've got up on screen, and you can see that very quickly you can get to hundreds and thousands, if not millions of fungi if you have a couple of square meters of water-damaged building affected. And so Aspergillus fumigatus is a notorious fungus connected with adverse health and inducing asthma. Now, what other fungi are also known to be connected with asthma? And this is very important if you are getting any type of indoor air quality and mold inspection or assessment performed, be that viable culture, be that surface cultures, be it the ERMI, the Environmental Relative Moldiness Index, be it some type of way that allows you to speciate your fungi, even from tape lifts, then it's really important to know the contribution of things like Aspergillus fumigatus and Candida, because those individuals who are sensitized to this particular these microorganisms have much higher rates of early onset asthma, and this applies, as we said, to young people. Furthermore, Alternaria, which is another common fungi associated with water-damaged building environments, also has a very close connection with the number of hospital admissions for asthma that just can't be controlled with these corticosteroids that can be obtained from a pharmacy and usually after a doctor has stated that that is appropriate for management of asthma. Now, what does this actually do at the level of your cells? Well, the more you are exposed to fungi, that is, the higher the concentration of fungal particles in the air and on surfaces, they have a direct connection to the amount of an immunoglobulin or IgE levels found in the lung. And there has been some great research dating back to when people were first looking at the connection between cigarette smoking and impaired airways. And back then they were looking at the contribution of the bacteria, yeast, and fungi that are present on the tobacco, which when lit causes an inoculation effect somehow into the lungs of smokers with these fungi. And so there's a lot of old research focusing on which fungi actually grow best in the lungs as well. And essentially, some newer research, again highlighted in the paper that came out last week on the 28th of November, what they did is that they reviewed a study in there that looked at what happens when asthmatics actually breathe out, and they collected the air and then they worked out using molecular methods which fungi inside, which are being expelled in the air, are most common in asthmatics. And you know what they found? 94% of people were colonized, that is, growing inside them, with cladosporium, 21% by Alternaria, and a whopping 24% by Penicillium. Now, again, something practical. The connection between visible signs of mold in a home, such as the presence of mold or damp odor in bedrooms and basements, is universally associated with persistent, ongoing asthma, which needs to be controlled, as well as the number of colds. And the colds, again, are the virus-mediated conditions which predispose people to an impaired immune system and then makes the asthma worse. Now, what are some of the implications here? Well, children with asthma are forced to change their way of life to avoid complications and exacerbations. And again, this paper came out late last year in 2018. It's an excellent article which is focusing on family history, parental relationships, the impact or the deleterious mental health and self-perception beliefs that the children themselves have about everything, because they've got asthma that requires control. And this paper is really, really important. It came out in Saudi Arabia. And why this is important is that they've got so much, they've got a hot climate, they've got the presence of a lot of airborne particulates. There is a lot of great research coming out of the Middle East, and there's a lot of great research like this, which is looking at the psychosocial factors of dealing with asthma. And also what they determined in their publication was that having asthma, especially if you're young, affects your social well-being and how you integrate at school, and therefore that has flow-on effects to educational performance and socialization within the school and how you feel about yourself. So asthma has a huge toll apart from the triggers of the cytokine or immune responses. And so this then leads to behavioral and emotional difficulties. And because there is such a strong correlation between the exposure to mold and things like anxiety, as we saw last week with the mouse model, and also a lot of studies showing that mold exposure leads to increasing rates of depression, it's again a no-brainer that if you're a young person with asthma and that's being stimulated by bacteria and fungi in the natural environment that you live in, well, this is going to have a huge impact on your emotional and behavioral well-being. Now, I want to quickly highlight a couple of publications which again are in the show notes again, because like probably all of you are looking for some take-homes here. What can we actually do apart from maybe cleaning more effectively, making sure our children see their healthcare practitioners so that they can be put on an asthma management plan, making sure that you do your best to maintain the home environment in such a state that it minimizes exposure. But what about these situations like the climate change or the fires in Sydney or the thunderstorm asthma? All of these things are going to keep happening and they're not really that controllable. Well, I want to focus on some excellent science which appears in the literature, and there are 3 papers that I want to go through. The first one is looking at vitamin D. And no, I'm not becoming a de facto pharmacist and saying go out and take vitamin D, but I am highlighting some of the literature research which is suggesting that those individuals who have asthma benefit from taking vitamin D. And if asthma is a concern to you, I encourage you to go onto PubMed, read the abstracts, and read about what this actually does to your body, because I think it is some really good practical strategies which could be considered biohacking in a sense, but you're really just taking control and using nutritional substances or natural products to help you. This might be really important. I mentioned before that Candida is particularly connected with asthma, and again a publication has appeared in the literature very recently in August 2019. And what they found is that vitamin D supplemented drinks were actually able to reduce the number of Candida infections. And I think that this is a fantastic piece of research, because Candida is so common in so many of the Rodak surface plate studies that we do in people's homes during post-remediation verification testing of their home contents. We see an overwhelming concentration of Candida type yeasts, and these are very, very, very common. Similarly, on water damaged building framing, Candida is one of the dominant non-filamentous fungal forms which we see in biofilms on these water damaged timbers. And again, vitamin D supplementation has been shown to reduce the ability of Candida to grow in the human body. And I'm going to finish off with one last publication with the enticing title, Vitamin D Enhances Resistance to Aspergillus fumigatus in Mice. And this is again a really important publication because it is inextricably linking the concentration of vitamin D with the ability of the mice to fend off the infection. And again, in that particular mouse study, they injected the mice with known concentrations of Aspergillus fumigatus. and the mice had been either put on a vitamin D restricted diet or those had a normal diet with vitamin D a supplementation. And what do you think they found? Well, those mice that had a deficiency in vitamin D died much earlier and had much more invasive fungal colonization into their bodies. So that is how I wanted to conclude today's live stream, because asthma is a very real problem. It could happen to anyone. The statistics are quite horrifying. You can't always rely on your ability to protect yourself. You might need to look into some of these more holistic approaches, such as vitamin D supplementation. Need to have a good look around your house. Make sure that if you do see any areas of potential water damage, that you don't just ignore them, because the main way that people end up with environmentally mediated adverse health is essentially by not trying to work out what is going on in the spaces they inhabit, and in a sense just not really connecting the dots. And it's so much easier now with the proliferation of Facebook groups and access to good scientific information to make connections yourself and to self-educate you. That's the purpose of these live streams each week. And next week, we're going to be talking about something also related to mold, but there will also be a strong practical component as well. Anyway, thanks very much for listening or watching. My name's Dr. Cameron Jones. If you've got any questions, reach out, leave your comments below. Please subscribe to this on Facebook as well as on YouTube, and bye for now.